Well, guys, we're going to try this again. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on with the system tonight. It's one of those nights. Should have Josh Johnston back on here again any second. We're just going to sign back in and get everything's going. But if you're out there watching them right now, let me know that you see us. And we're back on there. Like I said, it's going to be a crazy night, looks like, with the system. We're trying to get it all fired back up, though. See ya. Okay, I'm back on. All right, good. Here comes Josh back on. I think we maybe got it on. All right, we got it. I think we're back on again. Here's Josh.
Are we?
I think we're back on again. Let's knock on some wood here or something. But sorry about
Well,
that, everybody. I think we may have it back live at the moment, but it's one of those nights. It's crazy. I think the heat did it. I don't know about you. I think the heat's caused it. I'm gonna blame it on the heat anyway. But appreciate everybody joining in again. Got special guest Josh Johnston, fish biologist. He lives over in northeast Oklahoma. Has been on the show quite several times, and we had just started talking about a thermocline. Josh, you were going so good in that subject line, but I think we're actually kicked off. But
yeah,
you got to really explain it. If you would, please start that back over and explain to everybody what a thermocline, what it really is in a body of water.
yeah. Probably the most important subject we can talk about tonight. So, um, the thermocline is it's a it's a funny thing that happens. It happens all over the place. You have stratification in the lake. It's called stratification. Up north, you can have it twice a year. You can have it in winter, and you can have it in summer. We have it once a year. We have a summer stratification. And so that means you'll have a fall turnover. So when people say that the water's turning over in the spring, that's not what's happening because we don't have a winter stratification. So what stratification does is when you're in a lake, depending on how far the light can penetrate down, that's how far phytoplankton and those other stuff that are plant based, can take that sunlight and make oxygen through photosynthesis. Well, in the summertime, we have a layer of water below that light that starts to collect everything. This starts happening in May, and you should be stratified by sometime in June. And what that means is where the light's not penetrating, that water's not warming near as fast as this is. And all of these chemicals and everything are floating, and salts and different things are floating on top of that cooler water. And it turns into this very viscous situation, like oil in water or oil and vinegar, where you could put those in a jar and you can shake them, and it's just those bubbles, but they won't mix. And that's how that is. No matter how windy it gets, it just will not
Yeah.
mix after it gets to a certain point. When you get to the fall and that starts to get this water starts to get close to the temperature of this water down here, now all of a sudden it'll start to mix, and it's real volatile when that happens. That's why you get muddy water and it smells funny and all that, because when it mixes, I mean, it truly does turn over and goes crazy. So what this means for you as a fisherman is that once you get to this point in the summer, below that thermocline, there's just no oxygen. Everything that's breathes oxygen has taken it all up by this point. Early June or mid June, when the thermocline comes in, you can fish below it. That's fine. But now, wherever your thermocline is, if you're in a real muddy lake and that thermocline's at like 6 or 8 feet, you need to be fishing above 6 or 8 feet.
Yeah.
Um, in fact, if you've ever known anybody that jug lines, a lot of those guys think the catfish are real deep in the summer, and they'll wonder why all their fish are dying,
Yeah.
because they've got a weight on there and they've got it way down there. Well, those fish will go down there to get some relief in the cool, and then they just get a good opportunity to bite something. Well, now they've got a hook in their mouth and they can't come up, and there's no oxygen. So all the feeding and the 99% of the feeding and that sort of stuff is going on above that line.
And I've seen this in like a lake, shallow lake, and I can see a distinct thermocline set up. And and I'm gonna say the average depth of this water is about 10 foot, and a thermocline would be 6 foot and down. It'll be on that bottom tier like
Mhm.
you're talking about. But a lot of times, I kind of feel like, and is there a way that those fish could bury up underneath that thermocline possibly, or
They so they depending on the species, catfish especially, carp, those types of species, they can go with a little less oxygen. You get into trout and they need like 4 parts per million, which is quite a bit of oxygen. But bass and crappie and those things are in there. They can't go very long without 3 parts per million. So they're not going to be down there doing much. If they're down there, they're sitting dead still, suspended, like I just got to get out of this heat. And I think that probably does happen a little bit in those shallower lakes. But when you start seeing them below the thermocline, I would assume catching those fish is nearly
oh yeah,
impossible,
yeah,
um, because they're like on life support. They've got everything turned down just to try to get. They're so stressed from the heat. In striped bass, reservoir strain striped bass, they're supposed to be in the ocean. They're not even supposed to be here. So stripers in reservoirs, you get this squeeze every now and then where these fish they'll starve to death. They'll just starve to death. You have these fish kills, and what happened is the fish starve to death because they're too stressed to eat when they're up here, but they can't eat when they go down here. So they're just all the time dipping down here, getting cool as they can, but then they need oxygen. They come up here, they're back stressed, and they end up just dying of starvation and stress. And so, yes, can they get down there? They could, especially to rest and get cooler, but they can't do much down there, and it's not good for them.
and why I say that is, uh, this lake that I'm referring to is Lake Washington, and everybody knows I've fished up there a lot. But it seems like this time of year, it almost like the crappie disappear, and I think that water gets so hot, and I'm talking water temps, from a unit which is close to the surface temp, would be in the low 90s,
Yeah.
89 to 93 degrees. And I mean, it almost feels like me if I'm taking my hand and putting it, it's almost like bath water hot.
Mhm.
But the fish kind of seem like they disappear. And the only thing that I can come up with my mind is in the daytime, they're getting down and getting out of that hot water and not feeding or doing anything else, kind of like you kind of described there. In my mind, they're just trying to stay cool for a minute because we swim a lot in the lake, and you can get down and you put your foot down in that muddy bottom, and it's nice and cool right on that mud layer. But everything else above it's miserable hot almost today. These summer days like we're having now.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of places it looks like they've gone somewhere, but they'll just get tight in some of that cover, and it's not really because they need the cover; it's because they're looking for shade. I think like the keys this time of year, and I said it when we started, but the keys are bait because they need to eat a lot. Their metabolism's high.
Yep.
Next key is shade. I think where you can get those shady areas. Like if you're fishing on, you want wind and current real bad, but at the same time, like if you're fishing on a bridge and the wind's coming from the south, but the sun is beating down there and the shade's on the other side, that you might find more fish over in that shade uh, than you do, in the current or in the wind where you feel like you should, just because they're trying to get out of that heat. Looks like Brad dropped off. Hopefully, I'm still on. Uh,
There you go. I think
oh
well,
yeah, yeah. So I think shade's very important. Current and that stuff's important, but I think a lot of times they're just trying to um, avoid the sun, and then so they're right up close to things. That standing timber and that sort of stuff. They'll get right up against it, and you just can't see them that well with sonar. I see this raised up outdoors. What does the thermocline look like on scope? That's a question for Brad because I can't. I honestly can't tell that well. I mean, there's places on downscan and in downscan and 2D that I can really look certain lakes that where you can just see it really well. And then there's certain lakes that I can't tell that well. I can just kind of tell because all the shad and the fish just kind of start at a certain level, and kind of realize when you're mid lake and it's at 21 feet that everything there, go down lake a little bit and all of a sudden they're at 32 feet. You kind of can figure out that there's a thermocline somewhere in there, but I can't tell a lot. Randy, can you see it on live scope in your
Yeah,
lakes?
yeah, absolutely. I can see it, and I see some other guys talking about it, and it kind of becomes a fuzzy layer. Even and what's strange to me about a thermocline, I've seen it about 2 or 3 different times this year, and it sets up, and it usually whenever it's really hot and not a lot of wind going on, but all of a sudden we'll get a big thunderstorm move through, and it kind of seems to dissipate some. Last couple of days, I haven't seen one on lake, but the week prior to that, I seen one every day. So it
Yeah.
kind of comes and goes throughout the summertime for us. But one of the things I definitely want to go back, and I see some guys asking about the lake scenario with the overpopulation of fish. What would be that answer again on that 330-acre lake?
Oh yeah, yeah. If you didn't hear that, basically, um, what really needs to happen is you need to pull some otoliths, some inner ear bones. You need an age and growth study, which means you just pull the inner ear bones, you look and you see, or a biologist does, sees how old the fish is compared to its length. That's the true way to figure it out. But you've got the exact recipe for in a 330 acre lake with 90% of them at this. You've got the exact recipe for just a stunted population, just overpopulation. So key is what's happening is they switch over to piscivory, meaning they eat fish, and there's nothing left to eat that'll fit in their mouth. They've eaten every piece of plankton and everything, uh, and so the next thing they do is they start to cannibalize, and 90% cannot get their mouth around one of their brothers or sisters. They're a little too small, or they choke, or whatever. But 1 to 10% might be able to eat one of them. And at that age, it is just insane from working in a hatchery where you can look at your fish one week and they switch over to piscivory, and all of a sudden you've got fish that are 1 inch long, finger length, and then you've got a group of them that are 2.5 to 3 inches, and that happened in 2 weeks. Once they get a big meal like that and they get it down, I mean, they just boom, blow up. And so once they get to that level, for the rest of their life, they're living easy. They can eat all their brothers and sisters. They're never fighting for food again because everybody else is stuck at the same size. So what you need to do is harvest. I mean, harvest very hard those 0.4 pounders or whatever those are. If that's 6 or 8 inches, you need you can't hurt it.
Hmm.
Take every one you can catch.
Would it be also like a good idea to possibly add more bass to that scenario or catfish? Would that kind of combat that issue as well in a lake like that?
Well, I think if you were to it's a bad idea, but if you were to put a whole bunch of blue cat in that lake, um, that would probably start to have a little bit of effect. That might help, or flathead. But at 330 acres, it's kind of scary to have a bunch of blue cat or flathead in the lake because now you're messing with things, which you could do it in 330 acres, but I just don't think you can control them. I mean, more bass is going to help, but those bass are, if they've got other food, I see bass eating crappie opportunistically, and I see them eating crappie a lot in lakes where they don't have enough other things, where they don't have enough bluegill that are existing exactly where they want to live, or shad that are kind of just drawing them in for their fat content and everything that draws everything to shad. So if you have a lack of them, then they'll start eating those crappie. But I just don't think they can eat enough of them. And the problem with it is your bass population is going to hell in a handbasket just like everything else because those little crappie they're not specific. They're not just eating little crappie.
Yeah.
The bass are generally spawning. Most like people will tell you the bass spawn first. Bass might start spawning activity first. They may be the first ones you see to get up there, and some early ones starting spawning activity. But in the real world, your major portion of the crappie spawn is going to be a week, 2, 3, 4 weeks sometimes before the bass spawn, before the peak of the bass spawn. Um, and I've seen this a million times on Grand Lake, where Grand Northeast Oklahoma, where the crappie spawn is just heavy, hot and heavy, April the 10th. Well, it might be May the 5th before you've hit the peak of bass spawn. So You start thinking about where those bass go. If you've got a stunted population of crappie, when those bass, little baby bass, start swimming around, I mean, it's immediate. They're just getting wiped out. So it's really hard to control them outside of humans trying to control them with harvest.
And we're going to talk about a little bit of the sketchy subject in the crappie fish, really the fishing world. But what are some of the positives and negatives that you're seeing uh, on the biology side of things when it comes to live sonar in particular? I know that's a big issue for people. Either people really love it or they really hate it. Seems like to me, and there's a big divide in there. But on the biology side of things, what do you see as the pluses, and also tell us about some of the minuses that you see about it?
Yeah, so the minuses, we'll start with the minuses because I think they're very few. I think the main negative is just the perspective of people, what they think, people's opinion. Some of it's because the things are expensive and you don't want to make that commitment as a weekend angler, and now you feel like you can't really fish anymore for fun because this guy's out here and he's able to do it a lot more efficiently. So perspective, that it's cheating or that it's hurting things. And then the other negative is also kind of perspective, but it's not. It's realistic. High grading. So I'm not worried about populations, especially of crappie. But you can high grade, meaning you can now just avoid catching 9, 10, and 11-inch crappie if you wanted to, and just say, oh, I'm pretty good at this. I'm just only going to catch 13, 14, 15-inch crappie. And if you like to eat them, then you're taking a bunch of those out, and you're changing population structure. Are you hurting the population? I would say no. And every study out there that I've read, I mean, there's like 20 of them now
Yeah,
or 18 or so from different states. The only people that have done anything has been you guys in Mississippi, Brad, that I know of. And it was 100%. That's what it's based on. It's just based on the fact that these people could go out and they could take a lot more of the big fish, which would cause travel and economic dollars and all this stuff to go maybe south if they were to really whack the population where people can't come anymore and catch that 3-pound crappie. So I think it's a little bit guessing that that's what would happen.
hmm
And I mean, I'm on both sides of the fence. Like these tiny little lakes in Oklahoma that had tiny little muddy lakes and nobody ever fished them until LiveScope came out. And then they went and they were like, oh my God, I caught a 4-pounder. Well, then everybody rushed in there. They all caught 4-pounders and they're on their wall or whatever. Those 4-pounders are gone and people are concerned about it. But crappie grow so fast. And
yeah,
those lakes, those little muddy lakes, I mean, they didn't just have these. It wasn't just some miracle. I mean, those fish right below them are just going to be, they're just going to grow right up to that quick. So the second you stop seeing them on LiveScope, all the LiveScope guys leave, and the next spring or whatever, fall, the people that live there are back just saying, oh, well, big crappie are back. So
hmm
um, that's my thoughts on the whole deal. That the positives, though, let's talk about the positive. I think the positive is that it's getting a lot more people involved in fishing. I really do think that. I think
yeah,
when a lot of states started allowing people to shoot a crossbow, I was a compound bow hunter, and I thought, man, this is just cheating. This is so much crap. But from the biology side of it and the side of wanting people to get outdoors, I mean, I think it got a lot more people out bow hunting. And I think LiveScope's done the same thing. There's a whole population of young anglers
yeah.
that are really good at this. And I don't know that they would have ended up being anglers if it weren't for this. It got them off the video games and out into the world doing what they love to do. So that's positive, and I think just moving the whole human experiment and technology and everything forward is always a positive. We all now, these us normal, as speaking as not a biologist, the armchair fisherman saying, I think this is going on. We were even further off base 10 years ago than we are now. A lot of us can look at that life scope and go, oh, wow, I never knew this is what this fish was doing. So we're all a little bit more educated about fish now, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Um, and if we even think about the crappie world of things, on the tournament side, we've got, our past 7 or 8 national championships won by young guys, um, and it is an advantage being younger and more agile, and they were raised with technology compared to some of our older guys, but it's helped put a next generation into the crappie boats and holding these crappie poles and catching these fish and enjoying them as well. And so I think there's a lot of positives into it as well. But do you see any use for biologists to really dig into capitalizing in the use of live scope out there that they really are not doing yet that they probably could?
Yeah, I think there's some stuff coming, and it'll likely come out of the scientific world. Um, my guess is that it's coming, and it'll come out of the scientific world because right now you can say, hey, we could do a lot with live scope, and you can do a little bit with live scope, but when you write some, so there's stuff like live scope that was around, 20 years ago, hydroacoustic type stuff where it's beep sending a bunch of sonar out, and it's coming back, and you've got a program on your boat that is reading this data, and it's spitting out the numbers of different types of fish. And so they were using this stuff in like oceans or to study shad, like forage based, because it's real hard for us to study shad. And they were doing that on large levels, doing it with salmon, things like that. To open a gate on the Snake River in Oregon, $1 billion project. Basically, if like 50 or 100 salmon were waiting, well, then this gate would automatically open because this cone was shooting out saying, okay, well, I've determined that this many of all these fish are now salmon. Open the gate. So there was some of that stuff, but it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And now you've got this stuff that is right there close to it that we can all get for a couple thousand.
Yeah.
So I think what we're worried about as fishermen on the next level, if you already don't like live scope and you kind of know a little bit about AI and the things that all these data centers and the way that AI is advancing, it's not that hard of a jump at this point for you to write a little AI code, Garmin or whoever you are, or even somebody on the outside that kind of takes in this signal like NBT has with their big screens. They learned how to take the signal from Garmin or Lowrance and produce it on another screen. Well, they could write some AI type stuff in the background, or just an algorithm that says, hey, I've studied this many pictures and we fed it to the model, and the model now will pick out, hey, these are bass, these are crappie, those are shad. Once you get to that level,
Mm-hmm.
one, we're kind of scared about it, but number two, on the fisheries level, it kind of makes a lot of things obsolete, probably. You still need age and growth and that sort of stuff, so you're going to have to net some fish, but you don't need to be netting a lot of fish. I mean, if you think about it, we've come a long way in fisheries. When I was young, real little, they still, to study a fishery, they would go out to your Lake Granada, and put a big net across the cove and go put rotenone in it and kill everything that was living in that cove. And then it'd float up and they'd gather them all, they'd weigh and measure them, and then have to take dump trucks worth of fish. Well, you just tried to figure out about the population and you killed a big portion of it.
Yeah.
We've gotten way past that. We got good electrofishing boats and that sort of stuff, but you can kind of get way past that if you once you get a little bit of technology written behind the code that's coming from the Garmin or the forward facing sonar. So yeah, I think science is really going to get behind it. I think there's already a bunch of science going on with it. That's, we don't know a lot about, but I think it's going to take over in a big way in the next decade.
See if we I'm gonna, we're gonna
What are we off?
I'm afraid so. It was so good. I don't see any. No, maybe not. Let me see if anybody. I think we might be still live. Let me check on here. I don't see any comments with my deal. I see us still live. Let me double check with everything. Okay, we're still
Hey, you're
there.
still on.
All right, good. I couldn't tell there for a second. Yeah, it's kind of weird what really could happen. And, my vision for what's next, and everybody says, well, what's next? What's capable of being really next as far as the electronics and things? And I'm not with any company to say, but yeah, I think it's kind of like TV. You think back in the 60s and even 70s, the picture quality of things, what it was then compared to now, is just amazingly different. I
Yeah,
recall, having to get up and, which tonight's not a great example, but having to get up and change and dial in the rabbit ears on top of the TV and the antennas to get a better picture. And I think the picture is just going to get clearer and clearer. And, I think most fishermen, once they really get out there and play with the technology, it's hard to go back and fish without a lot of days. Unless I mean, it's not going to be for everybody, and that's fine. Just like computers, there's people that still don't own computers or utilize them at all. But I think that it's just going to get better and better as far as the picture quality goes. It's not going to make the fish jump in the boat, but it don't make them bite now.
yeah.
But it's fun to watch them though. What's some of the things that you think you've learned by watching live sonar that you were wrong with before? Then now it's kind of proved you right and wrong, even to say.
Yeah, well, so one, I mean, there's two huge ones. I I think I just assumed, even as a fisheries biologist, that like, especially in the winter, that fish were just kind of sitting still, like a school of fish would just sit still. And now with forward-facing sonar, I mean, you rarely ever see a fish that's sitting still.
Yeah,
And when you do, it seems to never be a target species. Um, but even in brush piles, they're just kind of like moving in and out. And every now and then you'll have those crappie that'll just be doot, 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 just perfect. And it may be like a summertime thing where they're below the thermocline and they're just, I don't know. But for the most part, fish are moving all the time. And then the other thing, and you get fishermen talking about this all the time now, but it still amazes me that we have learned our whole life to be on this point and or on this flat or whatever, and the number of fish that are behind you
yeah,
out in the main lake is just insane to me. um, and it's just I knew that there were fish out there, fish that went deeper or whatever, but some fish, there's bass that I don't think are deep water fish anymore. I don't think they're like those offshore fish. I assumed offshore fish, they were the ones that like to go deep, but they seem to act like hybrids or something. I mean, they're like swimming around 7 feet under the surface and 50 feet of water. And, I don't know. I mean, they're just, there's a lot of things that I've learned where it's just, we thought we knew a bunch about fish behavior, and we maybe don't. Like, all these fish have a little bit of a different mindset. There's certainly ones that do what we always thought they did, and the low hanging fruit, the high percentage areas are still the places you ought to be fishing,
yeah.
especially in a big lake. Go hit those points and so find those current breaks and that sort of stuff. But there's fish out there in the middle of nowhere not getting bothered at all. You know.
Yeah. And I think for me, I was honestly surprised that, and I'm not talking just about crappie, but I'm talking about the overall fish in the water. I was amazed on how many fish is actually out there. From the
Yeah.
shad perspective to the catfish to the drum to the bass, I was totally, man, there's just fish everywhere. You'll turn this, said we were really keyed in on thinking, hey, we got to check this point and that current break. But a lot of times you can go out there and there's everywhere. There's just fish from the top of the lake to the bottom of the lake, and shallows to deep. But overall population of in the fish are way higher than I ever imagined it was.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And you get on these super productive lakes, and it's like, unless you're really, really good, and I'm not, it's hard. I mean, you watch like the Bassmaster Classic, they had it year before last on Grand Lake, and you have these guys that this is Ben Milliken and those guys that this is all they do, and they came here, and it's like, I don't know how you do this here. Anywhere I point the screen, anywhere on this lake, there's thousands of fish, and 90% of them aren't bass, but it's like there's so many buffalo, there's so many drum, there's so many carp, there's so many catfish, there's paddlefish, there's how do you
Yep.
ever sort through this and figure this out? And it's crazy. I mean, some of these lakes that are highly productive, it is insane to see just how many fish are living in that water.
I got Mr. Charles Henderson. He's asking. He said, "What causes the crappie to have red lips in the early summertime?"
Uh, that's a good question. It's probably, I would imagine, any of that stuff is fungus related, and it comes from. So you'll see sand bass, white bass, whatever you call them in your region, that'll have some red around in there, and especially in their gills. And it's when they're spawning, they're running up a stream, and they're down in the water and moving around, and they scrape some places, and then the water starts to get warmer, and it allows for more bacteria and fungus and stuff like that. The fish is stressed from spawning, so almost any of that in any species of fish that spawns in the spring, especially in the south where you get really warm water, when you start seeing those red marks and stuff like that, it probably goes back to spawning stress of some sort. And those fish building a bed, bass will get just nasty on their tails, where crappie, they may be kind of digging a little bit and getting their mouth. So I would attribute most all of that to spawning stress.
What about And I've seen it some of the smaller impoundments that I've fished through the years, and you'll fillet a fish, and all of a sudden you'll see a looks like a little worm in their flesh. What is that, and is it safe to eat that fish at that point?
Yeah, so you've got yellow and black grubs are the number ones that you're talking about, and that's almost always what they are. It's especially bad in pond fish. The warmer it gets, just the.
Yeah.
But yellow and black grubs, I'll start by saying, you know, they're safe to eat if cooked properly. The little black grubs just look like you've got pepper on your, and I've eaten a bunch of them, and rock bass and stuff like that. They get them real bad. But, if they're fried in 350-degree grease, you don't have to worry anything about that. They come from they come from a snail they come from a blue heron or something like that, and then get into the snails, and then the fish, the snails get them into the fish, and so they've got these multi-hosts to get to the fish. So if you're in a pond situation or something like that, you can stock red ear sunfish, which is a bunch of older folks call them shell crackers. And
Mm.
those shell crackers, that's what they like to eat. They like to eat crustaceans, and they'll really whack those snails, and you can get rid of them. But in lake situations, I mean, and in most cases in ponds, you just have to deal with them. And some species get it way worse. Like if you've ever cleaned a smallmouth bass in your life, almost every smallmouth bass has worms
Hmm.
in the summer. In rock bass too. So, and I don't know why some species are more apt to have them than others, but they do.
Do they typically go in a way as that water temperature drops down? Because I've never noticed them in the wintertime, but it always seems like July, August, September, you fillet some of those fish, and you'll see, like I said, it looks like almost like a little hair almost that's in the flesh.
Yeah, I've forgotten all the stuff on it. It's been a long time since I've looked into yellow and black grubs, but I will say this: I I've never noticed them in the winter. And
Yeah.
it's always something your bass or people that eat bass out of ponds, they'll be like, oh my god, it's summertime and my bass are wormy, and I don't know if they just have that 1 year cycle, and then they somehow deposit the new ones out into the water to get on the bird and back in the snail and all that stuff. But or the fish eats it, and or the bird eats the fish and it starts to cycle all over again. That I think that might be how it works. But so they may just be a 1 year thing because I've never seen them in the winter.
Yeah, me neither. And I
Not
don't
that I
think
remember.
it's definitely, it seems about 3 or 4 months they kind of get bad. And I don't know if that water temperature kind of gets them out of the system or whatever. Um, but James, he's got a lot of questions about these odorless. But how
Yeah,
many?
I've got an answer for him. I've got an answer for him on that one. I wrote it down earlier.
Okay.
How many 0.4 pound crappie is good sampling for ear bones to be checked? James, here's what a biological agency would do, like your state agency would do. Uh, in most cases, if you're just looking at a population that's not stunted, we would take 20 crappie from each inch group we could catch. So it's starting at about 4 inches. You don't need to go below that, 4 or 5 inches. Once they get to 4 or 5 inches, so the 5 to 6 inch group, if they're between 5 and 6 inches, you'd keep 20. 6 to 7 inches, you'd keep 20. In your case, in a stunted population, in those stunted groups, we like to go as high as 30 or 40. You really want to see, you know, a good representation, and it's not like you are going to fill 25-inch groups, so it's not that hard for you to get that many because almost all of your fish are going to be in 2 or 3 inch groups. 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9, or 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8. So I would try to get 30 or 40 from each inch group that are in that what are not big fit, not good sized fish, your range, and then get them and freeze them or something. Talk to you or talk to a biologist around you close and a little before that, and they may let you just show up with a bucket full of them or something like that, or a bag frozen or something. And they'll pull the odorless for you.
Let's and I'm sure a lot of guys, and I like to hear it as well. But how do biologists typically go in a body of water and check it? Is it netting, shocking? What are some of the ways that a biologist goes into a body of water and dig into really finding out what's out there? How do a lot of times they get their information? I guess.
Yeah, so it just depends on the species of fish, but with crappie, we use for the most part, we use what you'd call a trap net or a fike net, and it's just there'll be a 40-foot lead that's sprayed with some black like tar stuff, and it goes all the way to the bank, and it goes out to this trap like an old sparrow trap or something where the fish swims in it, and it goes through a bunch of stuff that's like a cone, and now it can't come back. And that works for crappie because in the fall, we do it in the fall, water temperatures from 65 to 70, somewhere in there, because those fish will get grouped back up pretty good and they'll be running through those shallows. And when they get to that net, they don't go over it. For whatever reason, when that school gets to a problem, they just turn left and go out towards the main lake to go around it, and they just swim right into the thing. So that works for crappie. Now, for to gather these multiple sizes of them. Now, if you're going to look at your, if a biologist is going to look at spawning success, and they didn't want to wait all the way to trap netting season, you could go out if you're not in some steep and deep rocky lake, you've got nice pea gravel banks or something. You could go out right after the spawn. 2 or 3 weeks after the spawn, 4 weeks after the spawn, before those fish can really start moving around real well, and run seines at night because they'll come up in those shallows at night. And from your seine counts, you'd have to do this. It's kind of one of those things where you average it on years past. So you got to have a lot of data. And most of these things go like that. You can't just, other than age and growth and stuff like that, you can see, hey, this population's good, but your trap nets, you can't look at it just the first time you go out and say, wow, we've got so many crappie this year. You kind of need a representation over 20 or 30 or 40 years to say, boy, this is a bad year, or wow, this is a good year. Because some of these lakes trap nets just don't work that well, or some of these lakes just don't have as high a crappie population. So you don't want to compare it to this highly productive lake over here. You want to compare it to what it's done over the course of many years. Same with seining. You would seine, and hey, we only got 100 young of year's crappie this year in our 40 seine pools, but 2 years ago we had 14,000. So we're going to have a little bit of an issue here.
Do you ever see like these? And I guess it probably goes more about the funding and the manpower that a lot of state agencies have. But do you ever see them really diving into saying, all right, each individual lake needs to have particular regulations put onto them to for different goals that that body of water has, instead of just having these broad spectrums like you know uh, Oklahoma kind of comes to mind, that the 37 limit
Mhm.
would it ideally be, and why don't they have uh, particular regulations for every body of water?
Yeah, so some of it's time, some of it's resources, and that's what people blame too much of it on. A lot of it is, and you'll notice in smaller lakes sometimes, or lakes that are hydropower, there will be some different regulations. Um, but for the most part, these lakes, these large lakes, the Grand Lakes, the Fort
Yeah,
Gibsons, the Ten Killers, the Lake Fork, it doesn't it doesn't really matter, because when it comes to bass, it's like, oh yeah, we could do this specialized thing over here, but first off, people aren't harvesting bass. Like, we'd have to talk them into harvesting them. Every bass fisherman will
yeah,
tell you everybody else is eating all the bass, but you find me somebody, it's hard pressed for me in Oklahoma to find somebody that's eaten bass in the last year, much less last week. And it's pretty easy for me to just go through the neighborhood and I'll find 5 people that ate crappie in the last week. So
yeah.
um, people aren't eating bad. So it really does not matter. You do like a bunch of this stuff that we do is just this upper limit. Like, well, we wouldn't want anybody to keep more than 5 bass a day because that could be a problem if too many people did it. Crappie need harvest. And so the only places we'll come down from that, 37 is just a stupid number. We could have said 50, we could have said 40, we probably could have said 80, and it wouldn't matter, right? But then you get to these certain areas like Grand Lake or Fort Gibson or Ten Killer where you've got hydropower moving that lake way up and way down, and it's just all the time crazy. And you can miss a few spawns, and at the same time you've got some decent pressure on crappie. So that gets a 10-inch length limit with 15 a day, as opposed to no length limit, 37 a day is the statewide. Well, then you get people that look at that and they say, well, this is a great crappie lake. Look, they care more about that. Let's do this on so and so City Lake over here, which they do. Claremore City Lake, just up the road from me. They said, well, we want to be like Grand. Let's do a 10-inch minimum length limit and 15 a day. Well, within not very long, they didn't have a fish over 10 inches. There was no such that didn't exist. I mean, because you're talking now about a 700-acre lake, didn't have the pressure of Grand. They caught all the big ones, and now everything's stunted. It was stunted before, and now it's just incredibly can't get out of it unless you harvest. So we went in and we said, hey, you really need to harvest. Like, if we could make the limit 100 a day, we'd tell you it was, and we would ask you to all do it. But that would cause you'd have to change statutes and all kinds of stuff. So the easy question is, we could say it's time and resources, but for the most part, it's we're not harvesting enough. Humans are not doing enough to even get close to affecting it. So there's some certain things like slot limits that would have worked really well if people were actually harvesting. The slot limits that were built weren't to grow these. It wasn't like we've got to protect these fish so bad that because we want these trophies. That only worked really if the people were harvesting in between the slot, and nobody ever did that. So basically, you just said the limit's 0 unless you catch one 24 inches, because everybody that saw the slot limit says, well, I'm not keeping them below 14 inches, and they won't let me keep them from 14 to 24, so I guess I just don't keep any. So that doesn't work either. So a lot of times, Brad, it comes down to our fisheries are in great shape, and we are much less apt as humans these days to over harvest than we were in the past.
Yeah, I think, and it comes down to two. I think the technology, people don't have to struggle to go out there and fill up a freezer in the springtime and uh, catch them as many as you can while you can. Because with the technology now, literally, I have 2 bags in my freezer at most throughout the year, and we might eat 1 bag of fish once a month, and I know I can go out there and catch them, and replenish it fairly easy.
Yeah.
To when I was growing up as a kid, it's kind of like deer meat. We would right now we know we deer hunt in the wintertime, and when we run out of deer meat in September or August or July or whatever it might be, we're looking forward to again so we can harvest that meat again and
Hmm.
build up our stash. But crappie fishing has kind of evolved to where we can catch them year round, and we don't do it
Hmm.
anymore. And I think a lot of people are doing that. Even I just see so many more people fishing for crappie now on our lakes than I ever imagined. Now, 3 years ago, I wouldn't see a boat all week, and now I see 5 to 10 boats fishing, and uh, the fishing is as good as I've ever seen it
Yeah.
here. And I don't think it's hurting it at all around here. A lot of people they ask me every day when we're fishing, "Do you see the limits getting changed?" And I have enough faith in the agencies that, like you guys, they're doing a good job on keeping these fisheries healthy. And I think a bad spawn affects these lakes probably more
Yeah.
than anything else.
A whole lot more. Yeah. If you lost all your shad or you have a bad spawn, it it could affect it more than we could ever probably get close to
Yep.
in quick. It would take us, even if we tried to just rid a crappie population from a lake, it would take humans a long time to do it. 4, 5, 6, 10 years. You lose all your shad, a huge portion of your forage, or you have a bad spawn and it affects things real fast.
Yep. Well, I definitely appreciate you coming on here tonight. It's always very insightful, and I appreciate it as well as taking your time out of the day and coming on here. I know I've always enjoyed asking you different questions and hearing your side of things with everything. And plan on doing it again as long as you'll come back on the show with me.
I'll come back anytime. I like it. I enjoy it. I have a fun time, and saw one question from James there, one last one. It's up on the bottom of our board. What's the common number of threadfin shad spawns? That's hard to answer, James. Like, think of it this way, that we think of the shad spawn, especially bass fishermen, we just can't wait to fish the shad spawn, and we call it the shad spawn like it's a thing. And it's probably, May the 10th or 15th or 20th is just kind of when everybody's noticing it. That's when all the threadfin are spawning at the same time the first time because the conditions got right. Just imagine after that it just never ends. The conditions are right for threadfin shad and gizzards through September here, maybe even mid October, but definitely September. So they're just going to keep doing it, and it might be every 2 to 3 or 4 weeks for some individuals. It might be 6 or 8 weeks for another individual. So it's hard to say how many times, but a single individual probably spawns 7 or 8 times in a summer. The males more, the females. I'm talking from a female perspective, though. If you have a crap load of shad, it's probably a little less because nature kind of takes care of itself like that. Um, so, yeah, but there you go.
Well, definitely thank you again, and we'll get you back on here soon. And I cannot wait to do it again. But thank you,
Hey,
number one.
me neither. Thanks a lot, Brad, and I really enjoyed it. Anytime you want to talk, give me a call and we'll do it.
I'll hold you to that, buddy. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Till next
All
time,
right.
guys. Next Tuesday night, we should be back on Facebook that night as well. Everything goes as planned. And Dustin's out this week, as you guys see. But hopefully he'll be feeling better, and we'll have him back on next week as well. But next time, Josh, man, I appreciate it. I can't wait to do it again, bud.
Thanks.